And we're back in Inside the Ropes, and the man that is with us right now is one of our highest rated guests. Thousands of people listened to the last time he was on the show back in September, and he's now back with us. Lots has changed since then. Batista's back in the WWE, CM Punk's gone, he's now with Ring of Honor, but he is still the head honcho of MLW. It is Court Bauer. Court, welcome back.
Hey Kenny, how's it going?
Good, good. Yeah, a lot has happened since we last spoke to you. But we are going to talk a little bit about WrestleMania this time, since it's coming up in a few weeks, and just some of your kind of times when you were a part of WrestleMania events. The last time we had you on, we spoke a little bit about you happening to be an after party for WrestleMania 20. You were kind of at the show. Your
Sure.
exchange with Goldberg, which is all quite fun.
Right.
Dude, it's funny. Ever since you told me that story, whenever I see Goldberg in a show now, I just kind of laugh and always remember it. But you started with WWE right before WrestleMania 21, is that right?
Yep.
So obviously, because we've spoken to people before who started right before WrestleManias as writers. So were you sort of involved in any of the programs for that particular WrestleMania, or were you still kind of at that point just kind of easing into the process?
At the beginning, I really, looking at the creative business of WWE, their division, I wanted to kind of get a read on everyone and how they factored in. It's a hyper political environment, and kind of get a sense for who were the playmakers, the power brokers, who had the influence of Vince McMahon, who didn't. How do you ascend in this environment? How do you survive in this environment? And ultimately, how do you contribute to the process and make it a better product at the end of the day?
Hmm.
And you just had to continually read people and read situations and see how Vince read people and how Vince, there's like a million Vince McMahons. There's the one that wants to rule the world. There's the one that just is frustrated with his own decisions. There's the one that just hates all your ideas. There's the one that wants you to bring him all the ideas in the world, and he's excited because you have a million ideas. He's the one that just doesn't like one guy because he might look like an alien. I mean, he literally had a writer that this is a weird story, but it's true. There was a writer in there that he didn't like. He felt he literally looked at, from his face structure, I guess, or head structure, was like an alien, and it just freaked him out. And that was the end of that guy. And so, it's just a million different Vince McMahons. And I think when you have someone that's a tycoon in this line of work, I mean, yeah, to survive, to be who he is, I mean, you wouldn't expect him to be some kind of innocuous soul that would be kind of boring and mundane. He's a larger than life guy himself.
And for WrestleMania 22, obviously Eddie Guerrero unfortunately passed away in November of 2005, but
Right.
I'd never heard of this until when I started listening to the Bauer and Pollock show that you do. Um, I think it was last November actually when on the anniversary of Eddie's death that you were kind of talking about Eddie and different things, and there was
Mhm.
actually a potential match for him at WrestleMania 22 that we never obviously got to see. But
Yep.
I wonder if you could kind of talk us through that conversation, how that came about.
Well, it was during a conversation that was also going to. It was a broad conversation in November of 2005, days before Eddie's passing. In fact, it might have been like 24, 48 hours beforehand. And one of the matches was the primary focus of the conversation. In fact, was Bret Hart's return to the WWE and getting involved, and he had just cut a deal to do a DVD, the first project he did with WWE since the falling out of 1997 in Montreal. And it was a pretty big deal, and Vince seemed pretty comfortable with putting Bret's name into the discussion for a WrestleMania 22 match, and ultimately it was going to be Mr. McMahon versus Bret Hart. Bret Hart seemed on board. We actually had him not on the phone, but Vince had spoken, used as one of probably a million phones, and called him while we were listening in the background on conference call, and Work kind of pitched him the idea of the match, and Brett said he'd have to check to see if he can get clearance, but he felt it was interesting, and for the next few weeks we were under the impression that was the case until Vince said it was not. And the other match discussed that day on a conference call was in fact Eddie Guerrero versus Shawn Michaels, because they had some interesting parallels. Both in terms of their faith, in terms of their substance abuse, in terms of being heartthrobs in their early years in the business, in terms of being incredible wrestlers. And then just as a match, it just seems like it had never been done in that kind of a setting, if ever, and it felt like a really appealing, impactful match. And so that was what we were going to initially headline WrestleMania 22 with. The plans earlier in the year just, for whatever reason, just disintegrated. So that was what we were working with going in as of November, 10th or something, 5th on that point of 5.
And obviously, you and your former cohort Alex Greenfield you've spoken at length about the Rey Mysterio situation, and
Right.
I'm not going to make you have to repeat that for the millionth time. But obviously, I think the parallel and the only reason that I'm bringing it up, because I think it's interesting, is there is a concern now in 2014 that if Daniel Bryan becomes the champion, that's great.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
does it reek of the Rey Mysterio thing where Vince is going to want to prove people wrong by, having Bryan job to everybody? What do you think, as someone who, and I know now you're kind of on the outside because you're not with WWE anymore, but you were there for that Rey Mysterio thing, and just in the kind of, just to sum it up for people who haven't heard the story, basically Vince wasn't up for Rey being the champion. A lot of the writers really pushed for it. It happened, and then Rey was pretty much jobbed out for 3 months and then lost the title. So do you think there's any parallels to the Bryan situation, and is there any reason to be concerned?
Yeah, because I don't think this was the original design for Vince McMahon for his WrestleMania 30 attraction. And in the past, historically speaking, when you deliver something to Vince that's not in his wheelhouse, not in his comfort zone, he either is uncomfortable with that and doesn't emotionally invest and get committed to the level that he needs to promote it properly and get in that creative position where he's really dialed in and excited for it and is making it all it can be. And it's more of like he's taking his medicine because he feels the people he trusts are telling him something, but it's just not sitting right with him. And that's a philosophical thing. There's some people that like, vanilla ice cream. There's other people that like chocolate ice cream. For Vince McMahon, he just didn't like, in the case of Rey Mysterio, the scenario of a guy that is that small being the guy, you're number one in that position with the world title. And I learned a valuable lesson that you really, it's one thing to be an advocate for a talent, an advocate for an angle because you believe it can be one way, but you also have to be realistic about the scenario. That's not to say you're a sellout, but unless you're going to get someone's unwilling or undying commitment and their resources that come along with it, you really might just be fighting something that's just not worth fighting for, because in the end of the day, you're not really doing the fans or the talent any good. You're doing them a disservice, in fact, by positioning something that's just they're not going to buy into at the top level. And that was the Rey Mysterio thing. He ended up beating Rey weeks and weeks and weeks upon just it was just catastrophic for Rey, and I think it hurt him in the end more than helped him being world champion, which is that's not what you want out of a situation like that. So maybe Rey would have been better if we had just had him work with Kurt Angle with no belt on the line, or work with Randy Orton with no belt on the line, and gone in a different direction. But we felt that was the right time, the right place, and the momentum for Rey was really just incredible, and the ratings supported it on SmackDown. He was huge. He brought not just a Hispanic presence to the TV show in terms of the ratings and demographics, but very diverse in terms of who was watching. You weren't just getting kids, you were getting adults, you were getting teenagers, you were getting a lot of people, not just guys, girls too. So it's like the numbers backed it up, and the merchandising numbers backed it up. But Vince just philosophically just wasn't comfortable with it, and that's a big factor. And whenever you pitch anyone something, you have to make sure that they truly are on board with it. And Vince was never truly on board with that. And you know what? Maybe Rey never needed the belt, but I felt he did. I felt he was the right guy in the right market, the right day, the right time, especially after what had occurred with Eddie Guerrero. You needed a big Hispanic star, and there was none as big as Rey Mysterio. And Chicago is a huge market, and it's a huge market for Hispanics, especially Mexicans. So it felt like that was another reason to work Ray would be huge in that market for years to come because of this moment. And just felt like this was the right ascension, the right story, the right moment, and the business in the aftermath would be solid because you have an underdog babyface world champion. But there's one thing being an underdog, is another thing to be just demolished and have no credibility as a champion. And that's unfortunately how he was presented to the customers.
One of the interesting things for me going into WrestleMania 23 was the Battle of the Billionaires. So I've got a couple of questions about that.
All right.
It struck me, maybe I was looking too far into it, but Bobby Lashley and Umaga were two guys that you were involved with in wrestling and helping them sort of create their characters and all that sort of stuff, but it almost seemed like they were an odd choice because usually when there was a match with big celebrities, they would tend to put really established names in by that point. But what WWE went for this time was kind of the newer names, and Lashley and Umaga were put in there with Vince and Trump. And I just wonder, were they always the choice to do that? Because you hear the rumor now that there was other choices.
Originally, Vince wanted Ray in that role, but then it was decided that Donald Trump wouldn't go with such a small guy. He'd want a big, muscular, jacked up guy for that role. Hence Bobby Lashley, who Vince wanted to fast track. And so Bobby Lashley got the opportunity of a lifetime. And Umaga, of course, Vince would go with the biggest, most ferocious monster. Mm-hmm. And that was basically the logic behind it in our meetings, was that would be the two guys they'd pick. And these two representatives of what WWE's about, both. And I mean, look at them. They're just big, massive, jacked guy, and this other guy who's just this ferocious monster. It just felt like that's interesting representation right there. Umaga has someone to speak for him in Vince, and Bobby Lashley had Donald Trump. The problem was, once the match was over, it didn't elevate Bobby to the level it should have, because he really wasn't the focal point. He was kind of a wallflower on a special attraction that was between two very big personalities. So I think it would have been hard for anyone in that situation to have come out and been elevated from that opportunity. It was kind of like a zero-sum gain, but if you are the talent involved, it was one hell of a paycheck. So, and it was a great opportunity to do a lot of TV, and they were in the background for the Barkers, so to speak. But it was a great opportunity for them to make some money. So I'm sure they are thrilled by it.
And I know you've mentioned in an interview before that you didn't really get to deal really with Donald Trump too much until sort of everything had been finalized and it was going to happen.
Right.
And I just wondered, the dynamic of Vince McMahon and Donald Trump is just very fascinating to look at, because you told a story before, and I just wondered if you could tell it now, because it's just really funny to hear, is the story about Vince being annoyed about a coat.
Yeah, I want to say, it was like a week or two before the show being WrestleMania, and we were flying back after, it was, there's two stories. The first one is, so Vince does this angle. If you probably look at all the Raws, you can see there's one where at least one, maybe two, where, because it was done during the winter months, where Donald has this big winter coat on, and it had these big, shoulder pads, and he's not like a small man. He's maybe Vince's height, maybe a little taller. And Vince was just so upset that this man was wearing a winter coat, obviously to make himself look more impressive than Vince. And it really got under Vince's skin, and he was bitching about it in the limo heading to the airport. And then, I don't think it was the same night, it was another night where, all getting in the Air McMahon, as we used to call it, the WWE corporate jet, and it seats about 12 people, not including the pilots. And Trump's jet is nearby, and it's a bit bigger, a lot bigger, and we're kind of like squeezing it in there. You got the American Dream, who takes up, I love you, Dream, but you don't take up one seat. It's like 1.5, and you got a few other big boys on this flight. And Donald goes, "Hey, Vince, if you need more space, I have plenty of space on my plane." And Vince says, "No, we're fine." And as soon as that airplane door closed, boy, was he pissed off. I don't think he liked the fact that someone had a bit of a bigger plane and was offering it up and kind of making Vince look like he might have had a compact model compared to a luxury car or something like that. But, it was just one of those things, just ego and measuring dicks.
And who knows what would have happened if you'd managed to get on that Donald Trump flight?
Oh, I
Things
would
could
have loved it.
have.
I would have loved it. The first thing I would have done is pitch, hey, how can I work for Trump Enterprises or whatever the name of his company is?
Yeah,
But
exactly.
no, but and Donald was fantastic to work with. Vince and Donald had a great relationship. I just think those little times when Vince's ego is Vince, in order to be Vince and to be who he is in terms of success and just how he's wired, he has an ego. And those were those moments where some things got to his ego pretty damn bad, but he and Donald got along great. It's not like they hate, there was any animosity, just in the moment kind of thing.
So yeah, Court, thank you so much for coming on again and speaking to us. Hopefully we can have you on again later on this year when I'm
Definitely.
sure Ring of Honor will be doing their show in the Superdome and you can reap all the rewards of that.
There you go.
And just finally give a quick plug to MLW.
Yeah, we got MLW Radio. If you search it, you'll find that you can subscribe for free on iTunes. We also have a VIP package where you subscribe for just $15 annually, and you get exclusive podcasts from Jim Cornette, myself, Conan, a writer's room featuring ex-WWE writers, taking you inside the squared circle of the writing room and learning what that whole process is like and all their different stories. In fact, this week, we'll have Ted DiBiase on in the writer's room with ex-head WWE writer Alex Greenfield, who hosts the podcast, and they talk about Ted's time in the creative department, as well as Mid-South Wrestling, the Million Dollar Man persona, and we have a show every Sunday. It's MLW Radio. It's a free show. Conan and myself host it, and then every Thursday we have another free show, a Jim Cornette Experience show, and sometimes he has guests on. He had Alex Shane recently, and he always has something interesting to say politically or otherwise. So it's a fun time, and if you have access to the MLW VIP subscription, you have like 1,000+ hours of our back archives, including interviews with like the Ultimate Warrior. There's an amazing 3-hour interview where he actually talks about his relationship with Linda McMahon, and it kind of gives you some insight about why she's inducting him. And so there's tons of interviews with Billy Corgan, Mick Foley, Chris Jericho as he's driving to a WWE house show. So it's a really crazy, raw, honest show, and MLWVIP.com is the way to subscribe. It just costs $15 for a year and just takes about 60 seconds to sign up, and you can then we also have a free app which you can download, just MLW Radio app, just Google that, and it's available for virtually every smartphone you can imagine, and you can access our VIP content through that as well as our free content.
So now that you have put Inside the Ropes to shame with with MLW, Court, thanks so much for coming on, and we'll hopefully speak to you soon.
No doubt, Kenny. Thank you so much.
Take care.